All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating topics for your OCR A-level, religious experience. We're going to break down everything you need to know, from the core ideas all the way to the critical evaluation that's going to push you into those top grades.
So, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the basics. What even is a religious experience? Then we'll build up our core knowledge, looking at the different types and the key thinkers you have to know. After that, we switch gears to evaluation, the arguments for and against. And I'll wrap up with a sharp focus on exam skills, looking at how to nail that all-important conclusion.
You know, at its heart, this whole topic is basically a big investigation. We're looking at these incredible claims people make about experiencing God directly. But, and this is the important part, we also have to be detectives and consider the other possibilities. Could there be a purely psychological reason, or maybe even a physiological one? Just think about it for a moment. You know, that feeling of just complete awe watching an incredible sunset, or a sudden gut feeling that turns out to be right. This topic takes that kind of feeling and cranks it up to 11, asking if some experiences are so powerful, so profound, that they might just point to something beyond our normal, everyday world. Okay, so here's the core definition you'll need. It's all about that feeling of making contact with something that's beyond our usual awareness. It's sometimes called a supersense, like a way of perceiving a reality that our normal five senses just can't pick up. This idea is the bedrock for everything else we're about to get into. Right, let's get into building that essential AO1 knowledge. You've got to know the main categories of religious experience so you can really analyze them properly in your essays. We're going to cover 3 key types. Now this is a big one. Mystical experiences are often seen as the absolute heart of personal religion. We're talking about that direct, almost intimate feeling of being connected with the divine. And the go-to scholar here is, without a doubt, William James. James gives us this brilliant little toolkit for identifying these experiences. You can remember it with the acronym PINE. P is for passive. The experience happens to you. You're not in control. I is for ineffable. You just can't put it into words. N is for noetic. You feel like you've gained some profound new knowledge. And T is for transient. It's over quickly, but its effects can change your entire life. Getting these 4 down is absolutely crucial. All right, let's move on to our next type. Conversion experiences are so powerful because, unlike a private mystical moment, they often have very real, very public consequences. You see someone's life to a complete 180, and that dramatic change is held up as proof that the experience was real. So a psychologist named Edie Starbuck actually noticed 2 main patterns here. The first is volitional. Think of it as a slow burn, a gradual change over time. But the second, self-surrender, that's your classic road to Damascus moment. A sudden crisis, a huge breakthrough, and a life that is completely transformed overnight. And finally, we have corporate experiences. These aren't just one person's story. They involve a whole group of people at once. Think of something like the Toronto Blessing, where people reported breaking into uncontrollable laughter, or the story of Pentecost in the Bible. The big question here is, does having a shared experience make it more credible, or does it just make it more likely to be mass hysteria? Okay, let's meet the main players in this debate. Getting to know these scholars is like getting a ringside seat to this amazing century-long argument. Their ideas are the ammunition you're going to use to build your own arguments in your essays. William James is the heavyweight champion of this topic. And this quote is perfect because it shows you exactly what he cared about. He wasn't interested in churches or rules or doctrines. For James, religion was all about that personal, one-on-one experience an individual has with what they believe to be divine. And this slide really nails his method. You absolutely have to know these 3 terms. First, pragmatism. He asked, does it work? What are the practical effects, the fruits, in a person's life? Second, empiricism. He looked at the evidence from thousands of real-world stories. And third, pluralism. He didn't care what religion you were. If the fruits of the experience were positive, then for him, it had value. So you can see the debate taking shape. On one side, you've got a modern supporter like Richard Swinburne. His whole idea is basically to give people the benefit of the doubt. He says we should believe what people tell us unless we have a really good reason not to. But then, on the other side, you have the ultimate challenger, Sigmund Freud. And Freud completely flips the script. For him, a religious experience isn't a window looking out at God. It's a mirror reflecting our own deepest hopes, fears, and wishes. This is the central battleground. And that leads us straight into evaluation. Seriously, this is where you get the top marks. AO2 is all about showing that you can weigh up these different arguments,
understand both sides, and then form your own clear, justified conclusion. So let's break down the key clashes.
Let's start with mystical experiences. The argument for them being reliable is pretty compelling, right? People from all over the world, from different times and cultures, report similar things. Maybe that points to a common divine source. But the counter-argument is just as strong. That common source could just be the human brain itself, which is wired to react in similar ways. And yeah, the positive fruits are impressive, but you could argue that watching a really powerful movie could change someone's life too.
What about conversions? The pragmatic argument is their trump card. Look at the changed life. You can see the evidence right there. But the challenges are serious. Remember Starbuck? He argued it's often just a normal part of being a teenager and figuring out who you are. And of course, Freud would say it has nothing to do with God and everything to do with psychology.
Let's really drill down into that psychological challenge. The argument against it is that the profound, lifelong fruits just seem way too big to be simple wish fulfillment. But then you have thinkers like Feuerbach and Freud who argue that our idea of God is just a projection of our own human needs. And here's a killer point from modern psychology: inattentional blindness. It's been proven that we can literally fail to see something that's right in front of our eyes if we're not expecting it. It shows our minds can be totally, sincerely wrong, which really undermines the idea that personal testimony is reliable.
And what about a purely physical cause? This is where it gets really interesting. The challenge is stark. Experiments with things like Persinger's God helmet seem to show that we can stimulate parts of the brain and create a sense of presence. Doesn't that prove it's all just brain chemistry? Well, the religious counter-argument is pretty clever. Of course God would use the brain. If God created us, he'd use the physical systems he designed. But then you get the brutal comeback from a philosopher like Bertrand Russell, who basically said, what's the difference between a man who starves himself and sees God and a man who drinks too much and sees snakes? Ouch.
Okay, we have all the knowledge, we've explored the arguments. Now for the most important part. How do you turn all of this into a brilliant, high-scoring essay? Your conclusion is your final moment to really shine. Now have a look at this example. Forget the topic for a second and just look at the structure. What makes it so good? First, it uses the exact wording from the question. It shows the examiner you're focused. Second, it weighs up both sides, name-dropping the key scholars. And third, it doesn't just sit on the fence. It makes a clear, justified judgment that flows logically from the rest of the essay. That is the structure you want to aim for. So here it is, a simple 3-step recipe for a top-band conclusion. Step 1, acknowledge the other side. Give a quick nod to the strength of the counter-argument. Step 2, weigh the evidence. This is where you explain which side you think is stronger and why, using your scholars to back you up. And step 3, make a justified judgment. State your final answer to the question loud and clear. Follow those steps and you're golden.
And honestly, this is the real secret to A-level religious studies. There isn't a single correct answer here. The examiner isn't looking for one. They're looking at the quality of your argument, the way you use evidence, and the clarity of your thinking. It's about how well you argue, not what you argue for.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. Out of all of them, divine, psychological, or physiological, which explanation do you find most convincing? And more importantly, can you identify the single biggest flaw in that argument? Because thinking like that, that's the heart of critical evaluation. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your revision.